All right, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the darker existential themes hidden right beneath the surface of Truman Capote's classic early fiction. When we hear the name Truman Capote, our minds usually jump straight to high society, glittering jewels, and New York City glamour. But as we're about to see, Capote was actually using those incredibly shiny surfaces to explore some of the deepest, frankly most terrifying anxieties of the human condition. So let's start off with a bit of a provocative question. What could the glittering high society world of Audrey Hepburn's iconic character possibly have in common with the gritty, hopeless reality of a rural prison farm? I mean, at first glance, they seem like complete opposites, right? And this brilliantly illustrates what I kind of like to call Capote's bait and switch. On one hand, we've got the sanitized Hollywood gloss of the Upper East Side and Breakfast at Tiffany's, but then on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, we have the harsh, swampy, completely forgotten setting of Capote's 1950 short story A Diamond Guitar. But here's the kicker. Despite being literally worlds apart, socially and geographically, both of these stories are united by the exact same psychological struggle, the desperate human desire to just escape isolation. To understand how these characters cope, we're moving into Section 1, The Mean Reds, Confronting Existential Anxiety. Let's quickly define what we're talking about here. The academic concept of existential angst is often described by philosophers as the dizziness of freedom. It's this profound feeling of dread when you suddenly realize the world can be totally chaotic and meaningless, and guess what? You're entirely responsible for your own path. It's a super heavy concept, for sure, but Capote masterfully translates it into something incredibly relatable. And Holly Golightly perfectly articulates this nameless dread. She famously calls it the mean reds. Listen, this isn't just a bad mood. It is an agonizing, sweating fear that something absolutely terrible is looming, but you just can't quite put your finger on what it is. It's pure, unadulterated existential angst. So the crucial point to grab here is that Holly's anxiety isn't just the blues. I mean, the blues are just when you're sad, right? The mean reds are terrifying. And how does she try to cure it? By jumping into a taxi and seeking out the quiet safety, the nice suits, and the proud look of the Tiffany & Co. jewelry store. It literally becomes her sanctuary from the absolute chaos of existence. Now let's flip over to our other outcast, Mr. Schaffer from A Diamond Guitar. Here, we see a totally different manifestation of this angst. Schaffer is a middle-aged guy 12 years into a 99-year sentence for murder, so his angst has basically morphed into complete, resigned detachment. It's this ultimate defense mechanism born from decades of physical and psychological entrapment in a deeply oppressive Alabama prison farm. He has essentially armored himself against hope, just to survive. But we all know human beings can't live in a constant state of dread, which naturally brings us to Section 2, Illusions of Escape, the Tools of Avoidance. To cope with all this dread, we humans rely on strategies to just evade the discomfort. We use materialism, we stick rigorously to our routines, or we completely immerse ourselves in social scenes as these sort of comforting distractions. We literally consume things to avoid confronting our own mortality and our own isolation. Pretty wild to think about, right? And Capote creates such a fascinating parallel in how he visualizes this avoidance. Both of our main characters rely on diamonds as their tools of escape. For Holly, it's the real, completely unattainable diamonds of a luxury store. But for Mr. Schaffer, it's the cheap, imitation glass rhinestones glued to a young Cuban inmate's guitar. One is real, one is totally fake, but both serve as these incredibly powerful symbols of an unattainable freedom. This whole dynamic perfectly illustrates the fleeting and honestly dangerous nature of avoidance. This young inmate, Tico Feo, arrives with his dazzling guitar and these wild, exaggerated stories, and he actually manages to pierce Schaffer's emotional armor. They plot an escape, but then, in the absolute chaos of the breakout, Tico flees into the woods alone. He just abandons Schaffer there with a broken ankle. It's this momentary flash of hope that ends in a really bitter betrayal, proving that avoidance is never, ever a permanent fix. So what's left behind? Just that rhinestone guitar, sitting under Schaffer's cot. It turns into this intensely bittersweet relic. The glass diamonds literally begin to yellow over time. It serves as a permanent, genuinely heartbreaking reminder to Schaffer that physical objects, whether we're talking about genuine diamonds or fake rhinestones, they simply cannot fully liberate an imprisoned spirit. Stripped of their illusions and those physical escapes, Capote's characters must eventually face the final, probably most terrifying stage. Let's look at Section 3, The Pursuit of Authenticity, Finding True Freedom. Holly's own words here really reveal her true core. Despite her completely chaotic life as a socialite, basically living off the generosity of wealthy men, she possesses this searing self-awareness. She entirely refuses to settle for a comfortable but ultimately fake life. She knows her lifestyle is a mess, but she absolutely refuses to lie to herself about who she is. So the really crucial thing to grab here is how Holly actually achieves this authenticity. She does it by completely rejecting the stifling conformity of her era. When she finally has the chance to settle down and marry into wealth, which, let's face it, was the ultimate goal for so many in her position, she just walks away. She actively chooses to protect her ego and her true essence over cultural expectations and financial security. It's a massive move. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates why Truman Capote actually deeply disliked the famous 1961 movie adaptation. The film gave audiences this sanitized, very traditional romantic ending where Holly stays in New York for love. But Capote's original 1958 novella, it ends with an ambiguous yet entirely authentic flight to South America. In his eyes, the movie robbed Holly of her authentic, untamed nature by forcing her into this conventional Hollywood romance. Capote's Holly would absolutely never let herself be tied down like that. Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, Capote's enduring legacy, the beauty of the outcast. Let's examine exactly why his exploration of these outsiders remains so incredibly impactful for us today. You see, Capote remained this fiercely impartial observer of human fragility. He didn't judge his characters, he just didn't. Instead, he used these environments, like a rural prison farm, to neutrally reflect broader societal tensions, like Cold War-era homophobia and deep social prejudices. He gave a profound, truly beautiful voice to marginalized lives. Whether that was a rural convict or a drifting New York socialite, he showed us the distinctly dark shades of the American dream. And let's be real, these academic themes of retail therapy and using consumption to hide from existential dread, they're just as relevant today as they were way back in the 1950s. We absolutely still use shopping, status, and symbols of wealth to momentarily distract ourselves from those much heavier questions, like who we are and what we're actually doing with our lives. I'll leave you with this hauntingly beautiful piece of advice from Capote himself. Never love a wild thing. It's a pretty stark warning, isn't it? A warning against trying to capture, tame, or own someone else's untamed authenticity. True freedom, Capote suggests here, is something that simply cannot be bought, and it definitely cannot be caged. Finally, I really want you to ask yourself, when that nameless anxiety creeps in, what illusions do you use to escape? What is your personal Tiffany's? And are you using it to actually find yourself, or are you just using it to hide? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparked some curiosity for you today, and I'll catch you next time.